Welcome, dear listeners, to the Always Hope podcast, the show that provides solutions to better life. I'm your host, Dr. Mario Sacasa, licensed marriage and family therapist, and thanks so much for letting me be part of your day today. Here we are, the season of Advent, the season of hope. And today's episode is the beginning of a 4-part series on Advent that I'm doing that's going to teach you how to make this season into one of healing and one of hope. And we begin our reflections by unpacking the term acceptance. Not something that we normally associate with Advent, but stay tuned and you're going to figure out why acceptance is a crucial part of this season. So I want to ask you this. Are you struggling with accepting the year that has been? Have things not quite worked out the way that you wanted? And are you a little unsure how to surrender it to God? If so, and I'm so happy that you found this episode. And joining me on the podcast today to help unpack acceptance is Steven Hryniewicz, a skilled practitioner in acceptance and commitment therapy. Steven and I talk about how ACT encourages us to drop the struggle with difficult thoughts and emotions, giving us the freedom to focus on what truly matters. We examine how ACT can help us embrace psychological flexibility and align our actions with our values. We also dive into how Advent, as a season of both light and darkness, beginning and ending, mirrors the therapeutic journey of finding meaning and grace in all parts of our life, even the painful ones. Whether it's managing anxiety, processing grief, or finding happiness, this episode offers practical insights and a fresh perspective for the season. If you're ready to embrace this Advent with a renewed sense of acceptance, hope, and purpose, then this conversation is for you, and let's get into this. And as you're listening to this episode, if you have any questions that may pop up, please drop them in the comments. I'll answer those questions and we'll have a wonderful conversation going as well. So let's get into this conversation with Steven Hryniewicz. Steven Hryniewicz, welcome to the Always Hope podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mario. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. I'm so grateful to have this. Now, grateful because we've had many conversations not recorded, and I think we both said right before we started recording, those are pretty good conversations. We probably should have recorded those.
Mm-hmm. Can't remember the content of what we talked about.
Yeah, but they were awesome. I'm sure they were great, right? It's because they were life-altering, problem-solving, solutions that we had discovered.
Part of me feels like we owe it to the world, to record our next podcast.
We owe it to the world.
Our next
That's what we're doing. You're welcome, everybody. You're welcome, listener. This is you're being graced by our conversation. Wow. So we just set the bar really high.
Yeah, no kidding.
So let's tone that down just a little bit.
Sure.
I'm looking forward to today's conversation. You are one of the few practitioners, counselors who I know that practices with this modality called acceptance commitment therapy, ACT. Mm-hmm. And ACT is something that we've talked about, and it's something that I have recently discovered. I recently attended a 2-day live training seminar, which was just absolutely incredible. And I felt very at home with ACT. It seems like it jives very cleanly with the way that I am viewing problems, the way that I'm viewing solutions to people's struggles. It just seemed very natural to me. And so I wanted to bring this conversation into the podcast because I believe that these questions or notions of acceptance is something that we really need to be kind of thinking about, and we need to be reintroducing. I think that word acceptance almost comes across as a little bit of like resignation. And so we view it in a negative context now when we talk about acceptance. And that's not at all the way that ACT speaks about that. So before we go any further, just give us a little background about ACT. What is it, and why is it something that we should be at least familiar with?
Oh, good question. Yeah. And again, thank you so much for having me on. I'm a longtime listener. And, so it's cool to be on the other side of things. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this thing I'm just so passionate about. So you asked kind of what is ACT, and, I would say the best way to understand ACT is it's a process-based psychotherapy, which focuses on promoting values-based action and identifying barriers to that values-based action and learning ways to sort of get unstuck from those particular barriers, whether they're difficult thoughts, difficult feelings, in the context of trauma, difficult memories, flashbacks, any host of psychological symptoms. So the ultimate goal, I would say, someone asked me recently, how do you know when you're done with therapy? And I was thinking about this, and from an ACT lens, I came to the conclusion that, well, our mission here is we want to help people be behaving in ways that are congruent with their values. So as soon as we reach that point, we know we're on the right track, and that's really what ACT is all about.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Well, I mean, that is the definition of happiness, as I've heard it also, just the sense that like happiness is the alignment of values, and then because there are many, and there are many different forms of happiness, but having an alignment of those values and then being able to act or to behave out of them as cleanly as possible is the happy man, is the one that we would say would in fact be happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe they have feelings that support that at times, and that's great.
Yep.
There's these, I guess Ignatius would call it like periods of consolation, where things are easy, and that's awesome. And we should embrace that because it's all exciting. But then also engaging in that values-based action during times of desolation, when things aren't going well and barriers are showing up and life gets hard.
Yeah. Well, that life gets hard is real, obviously, for many of us, and for most of us, I would say.
Yep.
And so part of the conversation, I kind of have like two halves of my brain. Well, there are only two halves of my brain. So two parts. So dumb. I'll edit that. There's like two parts of me that are thinking about this conversation and what I want to accomplish. One is, as we talked about with ACT already, but I'm situating this discussion as part of this Advent series that I'm starting. And this is the first part of the Advent series, and really just wanting to dive deeper into how do we approach Advent. From like a therapeutic lens, I guess if I can say it that way. I try not to mix our religion, with the therapy but in the sense that like there's something that the church is communicating during this season. Advent comes at the end of the year for a reason. Christmas comes at the end of the year for a reason. We don't really know when Christ was born. It's not in Scripture, but there's a reason why it's situated now. It's because December 21st is the longest night. It's the darkest day of the year. And so Christmas comes literally in the darkest time of the year.
That's interesting.
And it well, at least for us in the Northern Hemisphere, I guess the church didn't care much for people in the South, but coming in the middle of the summer for you guys. But for us Euro Northern centric individuals, like it comes in the darkest time of the year. And that serves as a reminder that Christ comes in the darkness. So that's one piece that's going on. The second piece, and this doesn't matter whether you're Northern or Southern Hemisphere, is that Christmas is coming at the end of the year. And so Advent, as the beginning of the liturgical season for Catholics, is also coming at the end of the calendar year. And so there's a kind of a playing of time that's happening here in Advent, which is that it's and what's that doing is that that's calling our attention to see that Christ is the linchpin of time. So we're at the end of the year as we reflect in Advent, and also we come into a season of hope as well, as this is what it is. But then we go into the Christmas season, which turns the corner into the new year. And so every holiday season right now, every Advent and Christmas season, we have this opportunity to, one, be reflecting on the year that has been, but then also reflecting and anticipating the year that will come. And it's Christ himself who serves as the linchpin to both our past and our present. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Christ is kind of serving as a little bit of a bridge between those, those experiences.
Well, he's everything, right? So he's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. And so here we are. There's a reason why it's coming right now, not in the middle of July, because this calendar year has some significance as we mark it. Now, of course, New Year's and all this stuff, there's no astrological.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a tough one. That's a tough
one. I appreciate that. You're very kind. That's good.
Always nice when two therapists get together. The kindness.
It's awesome. We're going to be very encouraging. It's going to be awesome. It's going to have a great episode. Everybody's going to feel love today.
Yeah.
That there's no real significance. It's just the earth turning, but we've marked it a certain way. We've said that this is the day that we're starting to mark a new year, and so there is significance for us as we reflect on it. So why am I bringing all that up now in the context of ACT? Well, because I find that ACT, the first word is acceptance. And this notion of acceptance is something that I think we have to, as I said already, we have to reclaim. And if we really kind of approach Advent with this anticipation, with the sense of hope, what we also should be approaching with is also with a sense of acceptance in that we can look at this year and say, wow, like what went right? All right. And we can rejoice and praise God for that. But we can also say, well, what didn't go right? What did we not accomplish this year? Or what came before us? What are we ready to shake the dust from our feet and say, 2024, good riddance. I'm ready to be done with you.
Mm.
Like if we're doing this right and we're bringing kind of our whole selves into the liturgical calendar, I think this is the invitation that the church is giving to all of us, is to say, before we leave 24 and we start 25, how do we just come to some acceptance about what the year has been before we start moving and looking into the next year and getting too far ahead of ourselves?
Absolutely.
So how does ACT help us? How do we come to greater acceptance?
I think you make a really good point, Mario, when you're talking about how acceptance is something that needs to be reclaimed. I think you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that it's kind of a dicey word. It's sort of a word that a lot of people they furrow their brows at. They're just like, what are you talking about? Like the stuff that's so painful, the stuff that's caused me so much suffering all my life, or maybe it's external events, things that are outside of my control, that almost my values of, justice are like preventing me from, just kind of saying, oh yeah, this is real. This is something I accept, So there's lots of reasons why, that stuff shows up in our minds, that resistance. And I want to just kind of point out, as I hope it's okay if I kind of dissect the concept of acceptance as a way of answering your question. But,
please,
ACT is really rooted on this theory of language that's called relational frame theory. And relational frame theory talks about how language in itself can be something that causes pain and causes suffering. Just like, you actually, this is a good example, as you mentioned acceptance, some of us, myself included at times, might kind of wince when we hear that word. But we hear another word, a word that means the same thing we're trying to communicate in that context, maybe a word like openness. And there's maybe a little bit of a different feeling to that word, or there's a little bit more of an ironic openness to that word. So what's interesting is in ACT, we find that language is incredibly flexible, and we want to be able to use its flexibility to help us navigate our suffering when it gets really hard. So when I'm talking about something like acceptance, I don't have to be married to that term.
Can you give me an example of that first before we jump into that? I mean, I know
Sure.
you jumped into that. So give us an example of that kind of relational frame theory at work and how language can be contextual and how it can be used in certain contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that's behind this would be, a lot of times we assume that, if we get kind of really stuck on a thought, if a thought is really causing a lot of pain, sometimes we'll get a sense that it's the thought itself that makes the thought so scary, right? And so what do we do naturally when something's really scary? Well, we have to push it away. We have to get rid of it. We have to eliminate it. Mm-hmm. But what RFT kind of suggests is that our minds don't really work rationally, in at least the sense that, we can solve a problem or an experiential problem by just thinking rationally. What RFT kind of suggests is that actually our minds work more experientially and relationally. And so, when we encounter something and we assign a meaning to it, that becomes something that can be a source of suffering. So like if I told you right now to, think of a lemon, and hold it in your head, this idea of a lemon, you might have some thoughts and some feelings about that. And then I told you, okay, just sink your teeth into that lemon.
My mouth is puckering.
Yes. It's not a pleasant experience, right? But I
can feel the sourness in my mouth just by saying it. Yes.
Exactly. I just use words to create that experience, right? So what ACT seeks to do is we seek to use that kind of framework that this is associative, and to increase what we would call like flexibility, psychological flexibility with our thoughts. So this is a convoluted way of kind of describing how acceptance is more than the word. Sometimes with clients, I'll omit the word acceptance altogether, and I'll say something like, "Well, no, what we want to really do is we want to drop the struggle with this thing, or we want to increase our openness to it, or we want to stop struggling. We want to lean in." That's another big one that I'll use with clients a lot of times. And sometimes that'll resonate a little bit more. So that's an important, I want to get back to your question here, because I feel my mind is a winding trail sometimes. So I have to come back to it. But how ACT can help us is, when we're able to drop the struggle with difficulties, whether it's external or it's, and you know, in my case, a lot of times it would be more internal with my clients, you know, anxiety, depression, difficulty of any kind, suffering. Whenever we're able to drop the struggle with that stuff now has the freedom to come and go as it pleases. It's not stuck here anymore. We have this ability to actually take action towards things that really matter to us, even if this stuff shows up and it's not calling the shots on our life anymore. That's a concept that unfortunately is omitted, I think, in a lot of therapeutic modalities, where there's a huge emphasis on kind of going to war with quote unquote like negative thoughts or
Right.
negative feelings. You know, we want to fight these things. We want to get them away. And, you know, from an ACT lens, we would acknowledge that life is full of suffering. Life is full of pain. And, you know, it's best to determine how we can walk through that pain in a flexible way so that it doesn't impact our behavior and we can still be those people we want to be. And in the context of Advent, how we can cultivate this incredible virtue of hope in the way that we can best. I don't think that you fight me on this if you want, Mario, but I don't think it's possible for us to really live out hope and express hope if we are constantly battling with our own internal experiences and we're demanding that we feel a certain way or we experience certain things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Because what comes to mind with that is that hope as a theological virtue is a recognition of our finiteness in the face of God's infiniteness. And so Joseph Pieper has a phrase that says, hope more than any other virtue affirms man's creature, that he's a creature and that God is God, basically. And so it speaks to what you're kind of saying there is that if we're just trying to control everything, then we can never actually let go and let God, as people say. That we can never actually let go and acknowledge, okay, Lord, like you're operating within my midst. My finiteness prevents me from having omniscience or omnipotence. I cannot see everything. I cannot do everything. I cannot control everything. But my anxiety gets the best of me and hijacks, and I start thinking that I can. And anxiety is a hijacking of the imaginative faculties. Inside Out 2. Have you seen Inside Out 2?
I haven't yet. Someone just told me about it. Someone was just talking about that with me today. And yeah, I'm ashamed to say I haven't.
Well, you're a terrible therapist.
Yeah, I
You've
know.
seen it by now, so turn in your card.
My mind tells me that a lot, by the way.
Well, let's have some openness towards
Let's
that.
have some openness for that thought. Yeah, I can make room for it.
You can make room for that thought. Okay. But what the movie does in just a very creative way is that it shows exactly what we're speaking about. And anxiety is not a villain, but is an overzealous individual. And you can see that anxiety is hijacking the imaginative faculties and coming up with new ideas for the new problems. And every new problem has to have a new solution to it. And so we think through an anxious lens that if I can anticipate everything, if I can have a solution, well, that's if I can anticipate every potential scenario of things that could go wrong, then I can come up with solutions already to every single one of those things. And so what it does is two things. One is it makes me think that I have a little bit more control over a said possible situation. And then two, it also makes me feel a little better because I think I already have an answer to it. So there's a place where we do need to be thinking and anticipating and aware and understanding things that are coming up. Absolutely. But when our system gets overrun by this, then we start getting into this battle. I think that you've been speaking about.
Yeah.
And it becomes this kind of tug of war with our thoughts. And
Right.
and we start believing the lie of anxiety, which is, I think that I can solve this problem by outthinking it.
Right.
And so we start outthinking it, and we start outthinking it, and we start outthinking it, and we just go over and over and over again.
I just call that a trap, right?
Yep, absolutely.
You know, if I told you to
trap.
not think about a pink elephant right now, I mean, this is an old classic example, right? That's the first thing you're going to be thinking about.
Just thinking about it is a pink elephant. Another example of it is that for those of us in the Southeast and who have lived in the Gulf Coast area, we have to be attentive to hurricanes. And so whenever there's a hurricane that's coming through, what do? We just sit there and get on our phones, look at the news, making sure that the 5 o'clock update is telling me something new, then the 11 o'clock update, and I'm on it every time.
Yeah.
Thinking somehow that like by getting more information, that somehow that's what's going to ease my anxiety. It's not.
Yeah.
Again, do we need to be informed about where the hurricane's going? Absolutely. I'm not telling people to like not pay attention. Yes. But when we become overly fixated about that threat, we have now succumbed to our anxiety, and it has overtaken us.
Right.
And so what's the solution here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think, going back to this idea of being willing to experience certain things. I had a good metaphor that I think might be used recently. We went on a vacation. I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and vacation is not the proper name when you have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old.
You left the house and you paid to go somewhere else.
We left the house for 2 weeks. We came back more tired. That's what happened. Yeah. But, it was great to visit, friends and family. And of course it was a wonderful experience. But I was kind of having, my mind is always kind of moving in certain directions like this. And, I was kind of thinking to myself, if the mind was purely, just needed facts to run, then all I would have to do is I would have to just read the stats on how rare a plane crashes for me to be totally at peace and totally calm while I'm on an airplane. And then that would be all, right? Right. I know those facts. I'm totally aware of those facts. I can't remember they say like it's you're more likely statistically to get killed on the way to or get in a car crash on the way to the airport than you are to get in a plane accident or something like that. Yep. But yeah, when I'm on an airplane, I still get nervous and my heart rate increases a little bit. And I don't fly very often. So those of you who fly a lot more regularly probably can't relate. But that's kind of my point, right? You look at the flight attendant who is serving us, she's probably just as informed as I am in these statistics. She's probably just up to date and knows all of these other things. But her experience tells her a different story. Her experience tells her, this is safe. Whereas my experience is not quite on that part quite yet. And that's by design. That's normal. That's natural. And the most important thing here is not to kind of go to war with ourselves. What's wrong with me that I'm feeling anxious when I'm flying? I mean, this is a huge problem. No, it's a lot more useful to look at this in a greater context of the fact that, I don't fly very often. This is a new thing for me. And then we have an opportunity to practice other things if we're not fixated on going to war with our anxiety. Well, we can practice things like self-compassion and openness and connecting with our values. This is actually what I did. I'm not lying. When I was on the plane, I looked next to me and I got my daughter on her tablet. We downloaded this app. Apparently, there's no Where's Waldo isn't a thing anymore. I was looking for it, and there's an app that you can do Where's Waldo with, which is a little bit of a reality check. So she's doing this thing, and she's engaged with it and excited, and I was just like obsessed with her excitement, and I got in on it, and I was doing it too, and it's doing this as a values pivot, and also like being able to make room for those types of feelings. That's kind of what willingness or acceptance or dropping the struggle with these things. That's what this stuff is all about. So I hopefully I'm answering your question here.
Absolutely.
I went around in circles a little bit, but
yeah, we still have Where's Waldo's book, by the way. We still have
mad respect to you.
I didn't realize that they have an app. That kind of the whole point of it is that's like this massive book that you can actually look at,
and you can touch and feel.
It's like scrolling through. Yeah. A 5-inch screen trying to figure out where he is.
Well, the app didn't say Waldo, but the icon had a picture of Waldo. So I think there was some kind of like a copyright issue or something like that.
Oh, okay.
It did the same thing.
So not Where's Waldo, but I don't even know what a synonym for that would be, but that's okay.
Yeah, right. I don't. Pick another name.
Pick another name, exactly. Okay, so let's kind of recap this a little bit. All right, so if the anxiety is running on imagination, then letting it go, dropping the struggle is the answer. From an attachment response, what we would say is that we're reconnecting, and it's felt safety that brings about an alleviation of anxiety. And that's the attachment response, in a nutshell, is that we explore the unknown, and we experience some anxiety. And then when the unknown becomes too much, we retreat back to our secure base, our safe place. And when we have that secure base intact, then it allows us to recalibrate and then go back into the exploration process. And so we know that kids who have secure attachment are ones who are more willing to do exploratory behaviors in this notion versus ones who have insecure, anxious, or insecure avoidant attachment styles are less likely to do that type of exploratory behavior. And so I know I'm mixing our theories here, but I think I see a connection in the sense
Absolutely.
that what we're doing is that we're trying to, again, just help people find practical ways of getting back into that sense of security within yourself.
Yeah.
And you do that by dropping the rope, dropping the struggle, by recognizing that those thoughts are just there. They're not me. They're just a part of me. If only I were an algorithm, if only you could just give me the facts, like you said, and that would be enough to convince me that it would satiate my anxiety.
Yeah.
That's not the way it works.
Yeah.
But then I can meet those thoughts, not with judgment, but rather with compassion, with curiosity, with gratitude also, and a recognition that those thoughts surrounding, we're going to use you as an example. I appreciate you bringing that up about the flight, is rather than meeting that with some judgment, we could say, I see what you're doing here. I know what's going on. And I understand the anxiety. You're there because you're trying to protect me. You're trying to come up with answers. You're trying to come up with some solutions, and that's okay. And I appreciate that. So you almost extend kind of like an olive branch to your anxiety, and then that gives you freedom then to be able to make a choice, and that's where kind of the rest of the model kind of works, is that if we come to some place of acceptance, some place of willingness, then we have the opportunity to make the choice. And then the choice that you made was, rather than staying fixated on that, let's kind of let that go into the back burner just a little bit, as I draw my attention to what actually matters, which is my daughter that's in front of me.
Right.
And that process, I think, for many people may sound too simplistic.
Yeah.
But I think when practiced, it's rather powerful.
Yeah, and the word that was just going, what was my mind was just doing as you were talking, Mario, too, is like, because I was reflecting on, what we're talking about acceptance, and and a lot of people who are listening, you could be very stuck in this stuff, and that might almost sound a little bit grandiose and impossible, and that's why it approaches this from a process-based perspective, which we could get into. That would be probably a whole nother episode of time just talking about what process-based therapy is, but one of the processes that we're really focused on in ACT is this process called diffusion, which is where we learn to see our thoughts. Why
don't you define that for a little bit then? Just give us a little cliff note, like what is process-based therapy?
Okay, yeah, let's see here.
Let's go there.
Yeah, totally. So, I guess you could say a process-based therapy is it differs from you could call it like a syndromal therapy, which is more traditional, where we try to conceptualize people in clinical terms, where we say certain experiences are symptoms, and certain clusters of symptoms create disorders. And we don't throw this all out together, because there are some uses for this type of model in ACT, of course. But in process-based therapy, we are a lot more intrigued by sort of like the underlying mechanisms of like what's actually driving these quote unquote symptoms, and is it possible to see them in a little bit of a different light than that? So it's holistic. It's a little bit like non-pathologizing, you could call it in that way. And there's lots of different schools of therapy that will prioritize certain processes. So like you have, to my understanding, you might know more about this than me, but to my understanding, I believe emotion-focused therapy is another process-oriented, process-based therapy. So they're going to be a lot more focused on specific processes. ACT is focused on these 6 core processes, which we kind of talked about at the beginning. And there are other process-based therapies kind of popping up all over the place, which I think is doing a net good for the field of mental health, and sort of deviating from that pathologizing perspective. A lot of my clients, especially younger clients, present with a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and at the root of a lot of this stuff, certainly not all, but a lot of it is this resistance, this pushing away, this assumption that because I have anxiety, that means that there's something wrong with me, that I'm broken, and if you look at where the mind takes you with something like that, I'm broken, right? Now, if we hold on to that thought really tightly, that's more pain. That's more suffering. I guess the Stoics would call it unnecessary suffering. And enact with process-based therapy, we are hoping to take all of the judgment out of all of those things and just look at this stuff for what it is. So is that helpful?
Yeah, it does.
And
if
there's things you want to add to that, please feel.
Yeah, no, it's great. So the EFT model, in terms of that being emotionally focused couples therapy, back to like attachment theory and its relationship to marriage counseling, what they would say is, or Sue Johnson, the founder of that model, to echo this, is when you're working with couples, a great reframe is to say it's not so much that the argument is like something innate between the two of you. Rather, it's a dance.
That's right.
It's like a code that you already have, that you know what to say, what the steps are. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the rhythm of the conversation. And that just, what that does is that it then pivots the problem from being something that's like just the two of us and it's your fault or it's my fault or whatever. Rather, we both take ownership that we fall into this pattern. And it's the falling into the pattern that is the problem. And so if we can not fall into the pattern, then that's going to help us alleviate whatever the problem is.
Right.
So that would be kind of an attachment language there again, but it's very similar to what you're saying.
Totally. And it sounds like what you're describing too is this need for, I guess you could call like functional analysis. I'm throwing out just a bunch of pretentious language here, so I apologize to all the listeners.
I love it. It's great. It's great.
All the listeners who are just like, oh, psychobabble. Like, hey, I get it.
This is that episode. We're in it.
I'm on board with that. But functional analysis is about looking at these processes and looking at like what's really behind this behavior. And when I apply this to something like pornography use, for example, it's transformative because you're met not with shame, instead you're met with workability. It's like, what is actually behind this, and what's the payoff, the positive payoff that I'm getting from doing this thing, and does it work for me in my context with my values? Not to go on a whole tangent with that, bringing that up.
Yeah, we're bringing pornography.
Yeah, I know. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, no,
Another episode in the works.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're speaking to, again, just the fact that like there are underlying kind of emotions that are at work here. Yeah. And sometimes when we start speaking about this kind of from a depth perspective, I think often what ends up happening is we end up going into, well, we have to then figure out where the memory is that's connected to this and why this emerged. And my stance is, yes, to some degree, I think we have to go there, but we also can just acknowledge that it exists as it does, and let's work with it in the here and now. And if we do go back and process the memory or whatever this might originated, it's only to aid us in our ability to find flexibility in the here and now.
Absolutely.
And so psychological flexibility is really the key. People ask like, well, what is healing? What does healing mean to you? Okay, so that's a question to get asked. And I have kind of two answers for it. One is radical acceptance of everything that's happened in our life. That we get to the point, the healed person is the one who can look at their life and say, I wouldn't change a single sentence. Like that's like that level. And that's Father Walter Ciszek. That is his message through and through. So I would say that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is what we're speaking about right now, which is this notion of flexibility in the moment. It's giving your emotions are healed to the degree that you're allowing yourself to experience whatever actually the situation is calling for you to experience. So if it's a sad moment, you cry. If it's a happy moment, you laugh. If it's a grief moment, you grieve. Like you give yourself permission to actually experience whatever the situation is calling for without those judgments coming in, without those condemnations coming in, without that extra narrative coming in that oppresses us and prevents us from being able to have that level of flexibility with our emotions or our psychology.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Stephen Hayes, the founder, one of the founders of ACT, he has this great quote, where he says that there's just as much life in a moment of pain as there is in a moment of purpose. In a moment of joy. And this is a great quote that I'm butchering. Sorry.
Yeah.
Stephen
Hayes.
Great. There's just as much pain in a moment of Oh my goodness gracious. There's just as much pain in it. Okay.
Period.
Yeah,
That's
period.
it.
There's just pain, okay?
It's just pain. That's all there is.
There's just as much life in a moment of pain as there is in a moment of joy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard for some people to understand.
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Myself included. I say that definition of healing as if like I've achieved it. And believe me, I'm not there yet. Okay. But it does allow me to have some anchoring. And this is where our faith, and bringing this back a little bit to this notion of Advent, is incredibly helpful from a psychological perspective. Because if we can believe what you just said, that life happens and there's goodness, even in those moments of pain, as there are in those moments of joy, that something is happening here. I know Steven Hryniewicz. I don't know him personally. I don't know him at all. But I don't think ACT is a Christian-based therapy. But a statement like that just lends itself beautiful to acknowledging that God, who is the creator of the universe, that the maker of reality, the most real that could ever be, is good. And if we acknowledge that his goodness reigns, then we can see that, and we can operate within that lens. We can operate within his providence. We can operate within his provision. Mm-hmm. And what Christmas is teaching us, what Advent is leading us to in terms of Christmas, is that it's reminding us that this God who is good came into the world. And he no longer wanted to just be this abstract notion anymore. He didn't want to just be an idea. He didn't just want to be a myth. He is a person. Yeah. And as a person, he had revealed himself to the people of Israel for sure. But even more so, he wanted to become one of us, right, and incarnated himself. And that message is the message of hope. Mm-hmm. The sense that now God himself, who created this whole thing, took on every aspect of humanity except for sin, and took it all upon himself. Why? So that every moment of our lives now has the potential to be graced by God himself. Like, man, Christ came to fully reveal man to himself. That's what John Paul II says. And so there's a powerful lesson that's there for us. And we can look at these things as just neat theological truths, which they are, certainly. Mm-hmm. But as therapists, I'm always interested in, how does this shape the way that I then live my life in the here and now? Like, how does this influence my behavior? How does this influence my decisions? How does this influence which thoughts I allow to come in, and how I filter what I believe or what I don't, or what narratives coming in? Like there's profound truths that are here, right? Right. That again, the church is just inviting us to, during this season. Hey everybody, this is Dr. Mario Sacasa taking a quick break from my conversation with Steven Hryniewicz to want to encourage you to please check me out at Seek. If you don't know what Seek is, it is Focus's national conference. Focus is the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. It is a worldwide network of Catholic campus ministries that serve college students and young adults. Seek is their nationwide conference that brings in people from all over to be able to listen to dynamic presenters. And like me, I'm going to be one of those this year. So if you don't know what Seek is, or you've never gone, then please come. It will be in Salt Lake City, January 1st through the 5th. And if you are able to, please attend my impact session. It'll be Thursday morning, January 2nd. I'll be speaking about hope and how to be able to not fear our future, and how to be able to make decisions that are going to be hopeful and filled with wisdom as well. So the title of the presentation is Fear Not Your Future, There Is Always Hope. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed this conversation, if you've enjoyed this podcast, and you're looking forward to more practical insights, how to be able to make decisions, then please listen to my presentation at Seek, Thursday, January 2nd. I look forward to seeing you there at Salt Lake City.
The pivotal moments from his life, I mean, almost all of them involve pain. Right. Almost all of them involve pain. And, there's something that I'll do with my clients in a little experiential exercise. Sometimes, I'll have them, this comes on from the notion of, pain and purpose are two sides of the same coin. Mm. Oftentimes, when we're going through a lot of suffering, when we're really struggling, oftentimes if we look at core of that suffering and that pain, the creamy, juicy center of that pain, of that suffering.
As if pain
Right.
is like some cream puff that I bought at
Which
Sam's.
is,
It's like
totally the wrong impression. That's not how pain feels. I don't know if any of you have felt pain. It's not how it feels. But if you look at really the core of it, right? There's always purpose there. There's always meaning. There's a reason. There's something that pain is saying about what's important to you. Christ on the cross, there's pain there, but there's love there. These are
Shane Lopez, who is one of the psychological theorists of hope theory.
Yeah, that's right.
He says something to the effect of like, when fear is working for us, it's communicating something about our values.
Yeah.
We only fear losing the things that we care about.
Yeah.
And so when we feel fear about something, or we feel anxiety about something, again, back to this notion of, do we just approach this with the sense of judgment, get out of here, let me attack you, like just leave? Or do we approach it with a sense of openness and willingness and question it and say, okay, well, what's the lesson that's being communicated here?
And if we don't, then we miss out on that recognition of that value, right?
Right.
One of the pivotal, they call them pathological processes in ACT, is remoteness from your values. And that's something that occurs when we go to war with our feelings too much, when we go to war with our emotions too much, because we lose track of what's actually important to us. This is a really useful pivot that you can make even in a moment of pain, is to just take a breath and look at your pain in the face and kind of just ask it, not necessarily why are you here, but ask it, what's important to me? What are you telling me about my values right now? What are you telling me about what's important? Oftentimes there's a little pivot that can occur when we're able to do that, where it's almost, it kind of helps us give a little bit of personalization to our pain and to our suffering, so that we don't view it as this horrible monster that we can never look at, but instead we can kind of make room for it, and we can, we can just say, hey, you're here. I know me going to war with you is going to make things so much worse. I just want to take a second and kind of see what you're trying to communicate to me about what's important.
Wow. So let's put a little more context on this, right? So I think a little flesh on this, just for the sake of making this concrete for people.
Yeah.
An example, right? Let's say I do a lot of episodes related to dating, and so I certainly have a lot of single folks who chime in and listen to the show, and so I can hear, maybe for folks who are in their late 30s, early 40s, who have been single and have been trying, and they're on the dating apps, they're out and about, they're doing it, and all they feel is just that longing for finding their spouse, that longing, that prayer that has not been answered yet.
That's pain right there.
That's pain.
Yeah,
that's pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the first thing I would recognize, that this pain is a thing that's here, and that's a really hard concept to grasp. Sometimes what I'll do, lead clients through an exercise I just kind of call physicalizing, where we look at the pain and we kind of guide clients to sort of describe what that pain looks like. So they'll identify a part of their body where it hangs out. They'll choose a shape for it. They'll choose a color. They'll decide what consistency it is, whether it's a gas, whether it's a liquid, whether it's a solid. And it sounds silly. It sounds kind of strange. But what we're doing is we're studying it. That's the last thing that we naturally are going to do when we find something a threat. We're going to just run away from it as fast as we can. But when we're able to really notice that this loneliness is a thing that's here, then we can kind of gently inquire, how long have you been here? What have you been trying to communicate to me this entire time? There's some deep desire to connect with someone. That's important to me. That's important, and what we can do is, I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, the goal is kind of values-based action. It's like, when in my life, did I have connection with this value? When was I able to access this? Maybe we can use that information to kind of guide us to creating a little bit of a plan, like there's something that was happening there, this intimacy that was, something in that arena. how can I integrate that into my life right here and right now? Is there anyone in my life who's not getting that kind of attention and intimacy that I can turn to, and and invest some of that time and space that I have into that relationship. I know it's so different. I mean, I work with some people who are dating, and they're doing everything they can to get out there and stuff like that, and they're not finding any luck. And this is partially where acceptance comes in as well, because when we're pursuing a relationship, sometimes we have this idea, this goal that springs to mind. I just need to get into a relationship, right? That's my goal. The problem is we don't have a whole lot of control over that. Unfortunately, getting into a relationship, we can do 50% of the work sometimes, but it requires this acceptance, this openness to, honoring someone else's desires and their intentions. And that can be painful. So that's why, and there's a huge difference between values and goals as well. Goals are those things we can check off a list. Okay, get a relationship, great. Get married, great. Values are, well, what kind of person am I going to be functioning as in a relationship? You might, for me, something that's really important to me is someone who's kind. That's just a really important value for me, especially in my marriage. And so, when I am able to access that value, I'm able to use that flexibly to encourage other behaviors. So if you're able to identify, okay, this is what's behind all of this stuff, is this kindness. This is really what's there. How can I use that today? This is the kind of flexibility that can allow us to, accept these things that are out of our control and carry on. I don't know if that makes sense.
At what point do you allow the grief to be present also?
The grief to be present. You're talking about this relational context. Yeah. Well, I think, we can look at grief as any other experience, right? It's something that's, maybe if it shows up, then let's treat it like it's here. Let's look at it in the face, I don't know if, I don't know if it's ever useful. It could be, but I don't think it's really ever useful to kind of close the book on any of these experiences that show up. We want to approach them with curiosity and openness. And those of you who are listening who are maybe familiar with like mindfulness practices, I know there's a number of good Catholic resources on mindfulness practices. Mindfulness is what constitutes 3 of the 6 processes. So you hear some of this language, and it's really important to be able to show up for those feelings and experience them in the here and the now. When we get carried away by our grief or any difficult emotion, usually what happens is we get pulled into this future-oriented thinking, where we're fixated on the future and we're not here. So this is another set of skills that is present always in act, so that we can, when we unhook from the stuff, we can actually come back to the present moment and recognize that, I can be kind today in some creative way.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guide us through an exercise. I think you have one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You're ready to go. Because I think ACT, the other piece that I enjoy about it so much is it's so experiential and just has a number of tools, a number of exercises that it calls its own, which is just incredibly helpful. So guide us through an exercise with some of the time that we have left.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I wanted to kind of share with people, and I want to do this with a clear intention. That's one thing I always want to do with my clients. ACT, it can be a very heady, kind of at times abstract practice, and so I always like to make sure that I'm crystal clear about what we're trying to accomplish. So in service of your mission here in fostering hope this Advent, which another word for our purposes of a value is a virtue. It's a chosen quality of behavior, and I want to do this so that we can distance so that we can unhook from the things that are showing up that are painful, that are getting in the way, so that we can move towards that idea of hope a little bit more gently. So this is something that's called dropping anchor. And one of my kind of icons in the ACT world is Russ Harris. I don't know if you're too familiar with his work, but I've read
not yet.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. So he sort of just designed this basic experiential exercise, which he calls dropping anchor.
And his book is he has a number, but the most popular is Get Out of Your Head and get into your life or get on with your life? Or what's the title?
So that's Stephen Hayes wrote that one. But
Stephen Hayes wrote that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But Russ Harris has a popular one called Act Made Simple.
That's it.
He wrote it's the most comprehensive book I think for therapists. But I would assume it's very comprehensive, so anyone could probably pick it up and get something out of it. But he also wrote a number of self-help ones. One was called The Happiness Trap, which is a really good one.
That's it.
Is that the one you're thinking of? Okay.
Gotcha. Happiness Trap, and then he has like the expectation clap or something. There's like another
the reality slap. And he did another one too that rhymed with
it. The reality slap. That's it. Yeah. His publishers had fun with him.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they're behind.
But the happiness trap. That's the one I was thinking.
That's right.
About.
Yeah,
that's it. Okay, great. So Russ Harris, Anchor.
Yeah. So dropping anchor. So the idea here is we want to kind of just for metaphor's sake, imagine that there's a ship that's pulling into harbor, and a huge storm flares up. And
do you want us to get into a mindfulness space now?
Not quite. Yeah, I'm just kind of describing
it. I'm sorry. I'm taking control. My apologies.
I'm long-winded. I apologize.
This is what happens. I take control. My bad. It's my podcast. I'm sorry.
Hey, no worries. Hey, this is good. I mean, you should be taking control. It's your podcast. So if you could imagine like a ship pulling into harbor, and all of a sudden this huge storm blows up. I mean, that's what sometimes these emotions feel like, right? Anxiety, depression, trauma, grief. I mean, it's all of a sudden we just get slammed with this huge emotional storm. You have you're the person in charge of the ship, so it's kind of up to you. Do you want to jump overboard and try to swim for the shore? Do you want to curse the storm for being present? What this exercise seeks to do is it seeks to help you just focus on what's in your control. And in this moment, what's in your control is you can drop an anchor, and you can just allow yourself to be there in the storm until the storm inevitably passes, because it always does. It always does pass. So does that make sense? Does that describe that?
100%.
Okay. So that's what we're after here with this exercise.
100%.
So I want to invite everyone listening to kind of just take a deep breath and just allow yourself to kind of become comfortable in your seats. Push your feet into the floor. Gently close your eyes, or pick a spot in your frame of vision to kind of focus on in this moment. And I want you to kind of take a short breath in, hold it for just a second, and then just do an extended exhale. Let your lungs empty. You can do this a few times. And I want you to just bring awareness to what your mind is doing right now in this moment. Maybe it's saying a few things about how weird this exercise is. Maybe it's saying something about planning the rest of your day, or maybe there's some worries in the back of your mind about something. Whatever your mind is doing, just kind of notice that it's chattering away, always working. And I want you to observe your thoughts kind of like you would observe a stranger passing you on the street. Some of them are a little rude and gruff, mean, and others look a little bit more kind. But no matter what you might think of them, just allow them to kind of pass by in a curious place. I want you to notice what kind of feelings are showing up as well. Do your best to recognize this feeling if you're familiar with it already, or just observe it curiously if it's a new sensation. It might be something like anxiety, might be something you know to be sadness, grief, maybe peace, calm. And take the same view of these emotions. Just watch them. And throughout this exercise, your mind will be wandering constantly, and it'll probably butt in from time to time, telling you various things, and that's totally normal. But just thank your mind for its input and gently bring your attention back to what we're doing here. And just notice your body. Turn your attention to what your body's doing right now. Do a curious scan from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. Identify where you feel any tension. Notice what happens to your body, what your body naturally does in response to you noticing it. Take a second and just have a stretch in any way you want. Maybe clasp your hands together and push them away from you. Move your neck around. Just wake yourself up and remind yourself that you're here, even though the mind might be miles away, telling you this thing or that. Just remind your body that you're here and that you're present. And take a second to kind of access your senses. Notice what you can hear that maybe you weren't paying attention to before. Notice what you can smell. What you can taste. What you can touch. Take a second to identify where you are right now, not just physically, but what kind of things you're up to right in this moment. You might be sitting on a couch somewhere, might be laying in bed, might be sitting in your office. I just notice in this moment, there's a choice. There's an opportunity to be someone you really want to be. Curiously, think if you can put that to words. What kind of person do I want to be right here and right now? Maybe it's someone who's pursuing connection with others. Maybe it's someone who's hopeful. Someone who's fostering a sense of spirituality and their faith. Whatever it is, pick a word that feels right. And with everything we're doing, we're either moving towards our values, those things that are desperately important to us, or we're moving away from them. Just ask yourself, what's one of those towards moves? I can make right now. Bring your attention back to your breathing for a moment. Just notice the breath. Notice what your body's been doing since you switched your attention to that last part. And also notice that there's a you there noticing. Behind all of this is you. If you get to observe this stuff, those thoughts, those feelings, those sensations, then they can't be you. Take another deep breath. And kind of slowly shake your body a little bit and kind of come back to this world we get to live in. And pull up that anchor. So I'm just kind of curious, Mario, from your perspective, like what shows up for you after doing that exercise?
Well, a couple things. First, in all transparency, worry about the time and want to make sure that we wrap up.
My mind was doing that too.
It's been there. Not because my guests, I'm grateful to have you, but because I know we have a hard out here in a couple minutes. So that was there. But then I guess I would say a few things popped up. I mean, when you said, kind of give it a word, what would be the word of the value that you want to move towards? So we're always moving towards something or moving away from something. The word that stirred up in my heart was steadiness. And I want to be steady in the midst of the ups and the downs. That even in moments in my life, and just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean I'm immune to hardships. Of course, we're all in this together. And I have moments of anxiety and moments of burnout or moments of being overwhelmed. That those moments can really drag me down. And so wanting to have a value to move towards being steady. So the anchor, for example, is a beautiful image, and it's the reason that the anchor is the image of the show is because St. Paul speaks about in Romans that hope is anchor to the soul. That the anchor has always been a Christian symbol for hope.
I'm going to pretend like that was my intention.
Yeah. So I'm going to take it a step further, actually. And I'm going to pull this and we'll take it a step further. When the anchor that I'm currently using, for long-time listeners of the show know that about 3 years ago, I went through a massive rebrand. And I commissioned an artist to draw a new anchor as opposed to the one that I was using before. And my instructions to her was draw an anchor that is weathered, one that looks like it has been used and it's sturdy, one that you have confidence in this thing, that if you're going to throw this off the boat down into the bottom of the ocean or the lake or whatever, and it's going to, catch on to whatever's down there, that you have enough confidence that this anchor isn't. It's been used, yeah. And it's going to get you through this storm. And so that's why that old-timey kind of weathered look of the anchor, that's where it comes from. Is I wanted to evoke that sense of this thing is going to be something that's going to keep me steady. And that genuinely is the hope for the show, is that we are providing solutions to better life, and that those solutions are anchored in things that are real, whether that is our faith or whether that's the science. but that 100% is my intention for this show and for this podcast, is to be that space. So all of that, was emerging as we were going through this exercise.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool to hear.
What about for you in the minutes that we have?
Yeah, the minutes we have. Yeah. No, the time was going through my mind. I kept coming back. I always have this, this story that shows up for me, and it's showed up for me almost my whole life. The story that kind of says like, I'm boring, or I'm not making sense, or, people aren't hearing what I hope that they can hear. And this gets in my way a lot. So I've really done a lot of work to learn how to kind of unhook from that and allow that to be there, right? Treat that with a sense of acceptance. So that was showing up for me from time to time, in addition to kind of worrying about the time. But, the purpose behind Dropping Anchor, and, just real quickly, we follow this formula called, and the acronym is ACE, ACE. So for those of you at home who are like, okay, all of this stuff sounds cool, I don't know how to use this practically. ACE stands for acknowledge your thoughts and feelings. C is come back into your body. And E is engage in the world around you. So these are 3 steps that we walk through with Dropping Anchor. It is a very informal exercise. So I have my clients work on this very regularly, especially ones who are struggling with things like trauma and anxiety and stuff like that. So it allows us to basically get present, contact the present, one of the 6 processes, while doing so from a sense of compassion and openness. So it integrates all of these processes in that. A lot of people report that they feel kind of calm or relaxed after something like this, but that's actually not the point. The point is to grow in willingness, to allow ourselves to experience this storm that showed up while grabbing onto something that we know that can help us. And you mentioned before you're a proponent of polyvagal theory, and you probably know a lot more about it than I do. But to me, this is a great integration of something like that, where we can focus on, let's regulate that nervous system, and let's make sure that like we're able to access that safety and that security and that positive attachment as part of this. So I'd encourage people, please do customize this to fit your own needs, depending on whatever concerns that you're dealing with. And if you'd like, I have a little bit of a little sheet that provides more information about it that I can include.
Yeah, that'd be great. We can link that in the show notes. That'd be fantastic.
For sake of time, I know I'll hand it back to you because I know we're running short.
Well, Steven, thank you for guiding us through that meditation. That was really beautiful. And I hope people were able to experience it for themselves. And so if folks are listening and they're interested and want to learn more about the work that you're doing, any ways that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my practice is we're located in upstate South Carolina, so we're not terribly far from each other, which is another connecting point. Great. Yeah, and so my practice is called PAX Therapy Solutions, PAX Therapy Solutions. So you can just find us paxtherapysolutions.com. And we have about 4 clinicians who work with us now total. We do couples therapy, individual therapy, and children's therapy as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yep. All right. Well, Steven, final question, ask all my first-time guests.
That's right.
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? I should have been prepared with this one. I knew it was coming.
If you're a listener, you knew it was coming. Come on, man.
For that one real quick. Yeah. What gives me hope? I would say capacity to change gives me hope. My clients give me hope. Every day I see people change in ways that my mind tells me they can't. And that inspires me to no ends. And it reminds me that I can change, in ways that I need to change. And it reminds me also of kind of the grace that God gives us to be flexible, and to access those things that are important to us, even when life throws curveballs at us.
Amen. I love that. Flexibility. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Steven, honestly, I just hope that for everybody who's listening, that they've enjoyed this episode and that it helps give some fodder for their Advent season. And so thank you for being part of this and your willingness to do this interview and to share everything that you shared and guiding us through this meditation. And many blessings to you. And I pray that your Advent is blessed and that you have a wonderful Christmas with your family as well.
Same to you, Mario. Thank you.